Hello and welcome to the art class. This is going to be a digital painting done on my iPad Pro using Autodesk Sketchbook. And today I'm going to do a simple landscape. It's going to involve a fairly blue sky with a few clouds, a bit of a mountainous background, and some distant trees and some larger trees in the foreground, and a bit of land. And as I say, it's going to be a fairly straightforward, simple landscape. So with that, I've got a blue color in my swatch palette already picked out. I'm using an airbrush for my background, and I'm going to get straight to it. So to start off, I'm just going to lay in a background, and I'm just basically going straight across, or fairly straight across, and I'm actually covering all of the background because there's no reason for me to have any white in this whatsoever. Certainly not down here in the footer area, and this is going to be covered up later anyway. So I want to go a little bit darker here near the corners on each side, and that just about does it, because I do want some white in here. Just going to go back a couple steps. I'm going to select my next layer up, and I'm going to put in the indication. First of all, I'm going to get my green that I've selected, and this is going to be for the mountainous area. I'm going to reduce the size of my brush, by shrinking it down, and I'm just going to put in about halfway through the middle here, about halfway. I'm just going to put in I'm going to lower my opacity as well, and I'm just going to put in some indications here and there of some mountains. So this is going to be fairly basic, just some general shapes. And what I'm looking for here is just basically to get the essentials in. Not too worried about definition at this point. And I'm going to just keep this going up a bit, bring it down on this side, and perhaps I'll take this off the canvas in that area. And so at this point, what I'll do, I'll just increase my brush a little. I'm just going to fill this in. Again, this doesn't have to be super detailed at this point. I just want to get the basic shape of the mountain. It's going to be in our distance anyway, so it doesn't really require a whole lot of detail. You can certainly add more detail as you see fit when you're doing your rendition. I typically like to keep some areas lighter, make some areas a little bit darker, and you'll see why later on in future classes as well, because what this enables me to do is to actually see areas that I could actually add some highlights, add some darker tones, and it just kind of makes a fairly good mix of a blended area in which I can use to create other shapes later on. At this point, I'm going to go to a darker green, and I am going to change my brush. I'm going to go to a pattern brush down here. And what I'm going to do now, I'm going to go a little bit larger in the brush and a little bit less on the detail, is I'm just going to put in some small and I'm going to go up in my next layer, sorry. And I'm just going to put in some indications of some distant trees that live back in here. And these are fairly random. This is in the distance, so it's not going to be super sharp. Additionally, they're not going to be very super dark either. And the reason for this is because they are in the distance. And as I've mentioned before, the closer a shape to the foreground of the piece, the darker it will become. Shapes and items in the landscape that are further away are going to be a little bit lighter, typically because they're further away from your optical point. So now I'm going to go up to my next layer. I'm going to go a little bit lighter, and I'm going to bring the canvas in a little bit more so we can see what we're doing a little bit better. Increase my opacity, decrease my size. And what I'm looking for here is just to put in the indications of some highlights. If I go a little bit larger, you'll be able to see it a little bit better. And again, this is very soft. We're only looking for the indications of some distant trees here. I'm just using random shapes with my stylus, going up and down, moving it around. Obviously, I'm trying to, and I'm going to leave some areas dark as well. I'm obviously trying to give the indication that there's things happening back in the distance here. I'm going to click on the layer below, pardon me, this one, and I'm going to duplicate it. And what that does, as you can see instantly, is, and then I'm going to merge these together. So I'll merge those, and I might do it again, give it a second hit. And again, here you can see now it's quite dark. And we'll merge again. And that's about where I'm going to leave that. I'm going to go to my next layer, and I'm going to put in some darker tones near the footer area of that with a darker color. And to do that, I'm going to change my brush. I'm going back to my original brush, a little bit darker on the opacity. And I'm going to zoom in here a little bit larger so you can, whoops, that's a little bit too, let's go back. Maybe take it down a little bit more. Increase the opacity a little bit more. And that's still too much. Sorry. I think what I'll do is I'll go a little bit smaller. And I'm just going to find a line in here. I'm going to actually just put the indications in here. I know it looks a little bit odd because it's round, but that's okay. I'm just laying in some shape here. And this is going to represent the darker areas beneath the trees. I will go a little bit smaller. And you'll see once it's in, and once I've done a few things to this, how it's going to change. I'm staying fairly, although I'm going up and down, I'm trying to create some contour. I am going fairly straight across, in general, across the landscape. Okay, so I'm going to sort of bring that to about here. Now I'm looking for my smudge brush, which is, where are we here? I'm going to take a look at this one here called Soft Eraser Tapered, pardon me, and very low opacity, small brush. And what I'm doing now is I'm just taking off some of the height, some of the vertical distance of this, and just, I'm not too worried about this area down here, because that's going to be covered up. I'm mainly focusing on this area up here. I want there to be some rough edges in here, so that when we look at this from a distance, it's going to seem perfectly natural. It may not seem like you're doing too much with it. I'm just trying to take out some of the hard curves so that it has blending properties. So I'm just basically working with it. In a sense, ideally what I'm looking for is I'm trying to blend this into the lower area of the tree, trying to make it all one, if you will. And that can be done several ways, and one of the ways is the way I'm doing it right now. Again, we're not worried about down below, not worried about that whatsoever. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit more. And now I'm going to use the textured eraser. I'm going to use a fairly low opacity and a reasonable size. Come back in here, and I'm just going to sort of blend this out a little bit. Not too much, just the really dark areas. I may even go down a little bit in opacity. Don't want it to be too sudden, too much of a shock. So now I'll create a new layer, and I've pre-chosen this color palette. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to select sort of a landish color. I know this resembles sort of a beachy kind of color, but that's okay. That's perfectly fine. That's what I want for this. I'm going to go a little bit larger in the brush size, and I may do this at full opacity. And what I want to do here, and again, remember I'm on a new layer. Maybe I will cut it back a little bit here. And remember, this is going to cover up that sort of area we were just putting in there. It's sort of an edge to this. Okay, now for the time being, I'm going to leave this alone. What I'd like to do is come back into my swatch palette, and I want to get a textured brush because I want this sky to have clouds in it. Here's the size of my brush, somewhere around 67 or 65% opacity. You can see these light areas through the middle over to the side, and what I want to try and do here is I want to try and create, whoops, went off my brush there. This happens when you're, there we go, when you're trying to work. I'm actually behind the camera right now, so I want to try and increase this a little bit. And I'm just looking for a fluffy kind of shape here. So I'm moving in circle motions. So as you can see, it's not super defined right now, but that's okay. And I'm going to put some up in here with a rather swooping kind of motion. And there is a bit of an edge to this textured brush as well. If I zoom in, you can see here, I hope you can see this. See how it's sort of spattery? It's not really what you would call a fine edge brush by any means. And it's really good for doing this type of an effect where you're trying to just create some clouds. They're soft and they're usually quite diffused on the edges as well. So I've got them in. I've created another layer, and I'm going to go to my darker color sky, darker color for the clouds. I'm going to lower the opacity 35% and the brush as well. And because I'm on a new layer, which is above the cloud layer, this should show up quite well. I'm going to lower the opacity even still, and perhaps the brush size. So I just want to put in some indications under the cloud so you can kind of get its general form and overall shape. So here we go. Now it's starting to show its shape and where it lies. I can even put in a little bit, say under here. Okay, indicating that there's a bit of an edge here. Ideally, what we're doing is we're just trying to form a bit of a shape so that the cloud has scope and it has the dimension to it. In fact, I'm going to go to my slightly darker gray, create a new layer, whoops, and I'm going to even work with that. Go a little bit darker, just in certain spots. Something like that for now. You can definitely see that, see what's going on here. So now that we've done that, I'd like to create some texture to the land here because it's rather flat, as you can see. So I'm going to go into this camo brush, reduce the opacity, increase the size somewhat. And as I said, I've created this palette so that I can work with the colors together. So I'm above, so actually here's my land layer here. So I'm going to create a new layer above that. It doesn't need to be up here near the cloud area. Just going to zoom out here a little bit. And it's quite small. And I'm just going to create some little land pieces here and there and here. Just little indications that there's something going on. Maybe go a little bit larger. So as you can see, there's just some little rises in the land, little indications that something is going on. I always try to have some sort of directional value to my strokes when I'm putting things in. I'm constantly thinking of things that you would see normally if you were viewing this landscape. So there'd be little hills, little troughs, little things that are, sort of in the various areas. And that could be done, go a little bit lighter with my opacity as I get closer, because I'm going to press a little harder with my brush. So you can kind of see that although I'm closer and my opacity on the brush is low, in fact it's the lowest I've had it yet, with my pressing harder, two things are happening. First of all, my strokes are getting darker, but if I zoom out and let you see this a little bit closer up, I hope you can see this. Everything is textured. Can you see the various lines and strange shapes and forms and whatnot? That's due to the brush. The brush is really working for us right now. And that's what you want. You want to use these brushes and get them working for you, not against you. Back here, I see something back here. I'm going to go to a slightly darker, back up to the sky color actually, and I'm going to create a new layer. There we go. And I see something happening right back in here. I'm going to go quite a bit lower in size, but I kind of see a bit of a hill back here. That's what I'm seeing in here. And it's going to carry on a little bit more happening over here. Really want to emphasize this area. Look, there's a little dip in here. A little dip in the land. I'm going to go a little bit darker actually. I'm going to do this manually. It's quite dark. Lower the opacity even more. And if I want to make changes, I can do that. And the reason why I'm creating a new layer is that if I don't like what I'm about to do, go up a little bit here in opacity. If I don't like what I'm about to do, I can change it. I can even delete the layer. You're not committed. You're not committed whatsoever. And again, this is way back there in the distance, so it's not really key important that we get a lot of detail in this area. And of course now I'm going over the, tell you what, I just saw something else. I think what I'm going to do is go back over the area in here and put in some other little indications of land. Land changes, that is, land differences. It's always good if you can mix things up a little bit and work with what you've laid in the layers prior. I mean, I could even go a little bit darker, but for now this will do, I guess. What I might do is kick up my opacity so that things are, there we go. Just putting in some shapes, like there's some land mass back here that's doing different things. Almost looks like a beach. That's mainly because of my color choices for the swatches. I may fill this in this area as well. Okay, so if we look at that at a distance, it's starting to take shape. It's starting to take some good shape. So now what I'd like to do is I'd like to come a little bit forward here on the screen, on the painting itself, and I'm going to work in some my darkest color. Just going to put in some indications here of some tree trunks and tree areas. So I'm on a new layer now. I'm going to go right off the footer. Right off the footer. I'm just going to put in some indications here of a tree. Fairly basic, straightforward. Just penning this in. This one's in the distance, which is fine. I'm going to rotate my canvas here, and I'll explain why. Sometimes I'm right-handed, and sometimes I find it a little bit easier if I spin the canvas, because I'm working behind a camera. Like that's my recording camera is in front of me, so I have to sort of position myself to a point where I can put things in sort of a little bit easier for me to see and to work with. I'm just getting my eraser brush here because I just want to trim this out a little bit. Okay. Now, what I'd like to do is duplicate this layer and bring this back, flip it, and I'm going to bring it back here. This is a cheater's way of doing things in digital art. So I can actually make this a little bit smaller. Just by bringing it in. Might seem a bit distorted, but it'll work out okay. It's a smaller tree. And I'm going to just trim it up a little bit more even. We won't see much of this anyway, because it's going to be back over here. I'll keep myself honest and get rid of this branch here too, so I just have the basic shape of a tree. Okay, so I'll go up in a new layer, and I will go back to my second darkest green, and I'll go to the thorny brush. I'll turn down the opacity, keep the brush size relatively large. I'm just going to put in some basic, maybe go a little bit higher in the opacity, just some basic foliage areas. So I'm just using a circle pattern, nothing too dramatic. You can pretty much do whatever you want here. I'm just trying to just put in the general shape of the tree, just like a normal tree would be. And I'm going to duplicate that, merge the layers, duplicate again, merge the layers. Now that I have that, this is going to be fun. I'm going to move this above the layer I just put in, which is this one. And I'm going to go to a much darker value green down here. And I'm going to do the same thing. Only thing being that because this is underneath that top layer, this is going to illustrate that there's a little bit more to this tree because I'm using a much darker green. Increase the brush size so it has something to hang on to, and it's really quite full. So what I'll do is at this point I'll go to my lighter green, tap on that. So this is on top of everything. Still using the same brush. And I'm just putting in some highlights. They won't be everywhere all over. In fact, I'm going to reduce the brush. So I'm going to go in tight in certain areas. Okay, just to show that there's some continuity to the tree, like such. There we go. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this layer. I'm going to move that over to this area here. And I'm just going to, pardon me, I'm just going to bring this in as well. So I'm actually cheating, not having to create two separate trees. You could look at it that way. I could flip it horizontally so they don't match absolutely. And in fact, I'll even take this one out, make it much wider. Click done on that. I create a new layer with my lighter color. I'll zoom in a bit, and I'm quite tight on the size of the brush. I've reduced it significantly, and I'm just going to put in a couple of highlighted areas here and there, primarily on the outside. So there isn't really a whole lot of branches and whatnot in these two trees, but I've wanted to keep them fairly simple, fairly straightforward. This is a fairly straightforward, what I would call simple landscape. And I think I'm going to find my land layer, or just above it, and I'm going to go back to this brush that I used before, get my land colors out. This is the darkest one. And what I'd like to do is just to create a bit of a path. Just go back and forth. Go a little bit lighter in the opacity, a little bit bigger in the brush. And just go back and forth and create some sort of a little path coming towards the foreground of the painting. I'm basically just going back and forth, as you can tell, with my stylus, with my pencil. Just a little path that someone might walk on as they're heading back to wherever. It's not too important at this point, but there we go. A little bit of a path. Additionally, what I'd like to do is I'll go again to the next layer above that, and I'm going to go with a sort of a more of a, I want a charcoal color, sort of a dark, something like that, I guess. Might be a little bit too dark. And I just want to create some small land areas beneath the trees, just so it ties them in. Look, you can see a curve here. Things going on. Same with this side here. And we don't know what these are. They're just little things in the land at the foot of the trees. A little bit lighter on my opacity. Here we go. So it has some structure to it, it has some continuity to it. You can play with this and create as much as you want or as little as you want. And but with that, I think I'm going to close this lesson for now. I hope you enjoyed doing the landscape. I'm going to blow it up a little bit larger for you to look at it here. And it's been an honor for me to show you this. Thank you for coming to the art class, and I look forward to seeing you next time.